This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Therapy is an important step in discovering the world around you and finding your place in it. Transpersonal psychology is a humanistic approach to therapy, which values wholeness, holistic approaches. The essential self is a combination of transpersonal, self-transcendent, and spiritual aspects of human experience. All of life's experiences are considered valuable and growth-enhancing, and every individual is treated according to their innate striving toward a higher reality. Ultimately, in transpersonal psychology, healing and growth is approached through discovery of the centrality of self. Valeria interviews Maggie Lavey. She earned her master's in clinical mental health and is currently a doctoral student in the final dissertation process to earn her doctorate in psychology with emphasis in health and wellness at University of Arizona Global Campus. Maggie works as a clinical therapist associate specializing in trauma-informed therapy approaches, working with clients who struggle with anxiety, depression, relational trauma from toxic patterns, PTSD, and complex trauma. She holds certifications as an EMDR-trained therapist, certified trauma-informed yoga instructor, and mindfulness meditation instructor. She believes in a humanistic, holistic approach to the therapeutic relationship and helps support others in successfully transforming their lives in positive ways by increasing self-awareness of limiting thoughts and beliefs. She believes a combination of approaches aids in the journey to discover one's highest self and reach one's full potential. Meet Maggie at counselinganywhere.com. Here's the interview with Maggie Lavey.
In your own words, who is Maggie Lavey?
Thank you. In my own words, I would say I am an associate therapist that works as a trauma-informed therapist and working in the healing arts. I would consider myself to be a lifelong learner, if I had to put some labels on that. Just a person myself who's kind of exploring this journey of life, trying to tap into my own true essence, and believe I've found that path and that connection through the healing arts.
When you say being in touch with that true essence, how would you describe that, Maggie? What does it feel like? What does it look like to find that true essence?
That's a good question. Yes. And kind of a topic that I still continue to explore. But I would say at least how that speaks to me at this point is feeling very aligned with your true purpose, I would say. Just doing something that feels very meaningful and connected to the essence of who you are, and meaning that kind of in the sense of a little bit of tapping into that authentic self, as well as a little bit of transcendence of self combined. And probably just really knowing that work really speaks to you.
Yeah, there's something about, it's almost like a very relaxing, trusting place, isn't it? I always go back to trust when I think about living authentically and from that essence place. I'm not sure if that resonates with you, but there's something about trust when I think about it.
Yeah, just trusting. I hear what you're saying about maybe difficult to define in terms or words, but yet kind of a higher consciousness understanding of what that might be. But like you say, just trusting, just knowing that you're in the place uh, that kind of just connects with that true essence of who you are. I think often of the quote you hear where when you do something you love, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I feel like understanding that, at least for me, I understand that now by living it. And so that's something that kind of speaks to me, that it's just something that is just such a match of I want to say, that true self.
That really resonates true. No words to describe in a way, but we can somehow, from a personal perspective, kind of, it seems like it's trusting life, really. I'm trusting life to be itself through me. And whatever is happening, it's okay. In a sense of being anything, could be a good thing or a bad thing or a not so pleasant thing. It doesn't matter. It's just trusting that it's life doing what it does.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming from a spiritual perspective. I would love to hear a bit more about your spiritual understanding of life. Like the question would be, what is spirituality to you? What is to be spiritual, Maggie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think of spirituality as such an important component, and talking about healing, even from that holistic view, right, where we include the spiritual aspect. So if I had to put that in a definition, I would say for me, spirituality is something that cannot maybe always be explained in those words. So a little of what we were
Yeah,
just talking
yeah.
about, where, it's hard to define it in our terms, but yet kind of that feeling of just that trust or letting go and knowing there's just this, I say this higher purpose, some alignment beyond ourselves. I think of spirituality very much in that, kind of letting go of doing things, let's say, our way, or forcing these things our way, but kind of things that manifest through us. So that's probably a little bit of how I might define some of that spirituality side.
It's amazing how we find this sense of purpose and meaning when we start to do works or engage in actions that benefit ourselves and others at the same time. That really kind of almost like feels like it is the definition of spirituality without defining it, just living it.
Mm-hmm. That speaks to me. I hear what you're saying there, and I feel that, the fact that it's just something that it just connects with you, and it's just something you feel and just understand without maybe having let's say, a knowledgeable understanding, but a little bit more of that conscientious understanding that this is the place to be.
Yeah, right. It feels very natural. Yes, right.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like
Mm-hmm.
being a flower, being a plant, just doing what it does. I love the quote on your website. It's by Dalai Lama. It says, "The purpose of our life is to be happy." It sounds very simple, but it's very profound. I mean, everyone's looking to be happy and peaceful. I mean, it's all up to me. It's all about peace. And then from peace, happiness arises. But going back to happiness, do you distinguish happiness from joy, or are they one and the same from your perspective?
That's a really good question. I think doing things that bring us joy can equate to happiness. And just kind of what we were talking about a little earlier here, when you shared that quote, I thought back to that happiness of kind of aligning ourselves with our true nature and what it is that we are, or who we are, and what calls to us. I do think that's one of the ways to attain that happiness. What you said too, some of that peace, just that connection.
It feels very natural. Yeah, going back to that idea of coming from the true essence, aligning ourselves with that. And then it's almost like automatically or naturally we become happy. It's a very interesting thing to see. And then a question that I often ask, maybe not to everyone, is that something that we practice for life, Maggie? Or this is an understanding in time? It is a state that we carry through our lives.
I do think that is can change throughout life. I think maybe there's a chance to really tap into that part of us. I do think it takes some work to, I say, discover or really kind of uncover that part. But I don't know if that's 100% ever really done. Maybe you think that might be for a time, and then perhaps learn something new or have an enhanced self-awareness that leads you to understand, here's some other parts that I've uncovered of this true essence that I hold. And I believe that's something that we all have, that we're born with.
It's an ongoing process. It never really gets finished or done. No destination. I love that too, that idea. I believe that too. Another question I have for you, an open question, is about mental health. How do you define what mental health is? What is to be mentally healthy?
That's another good question, kind of talking about those holistic parts of us, our physical being, our spiritual being, and then our mental being, and kind of thinking about that from not only a brain state, but also a mind state, and just having very healthy, helpful ways of mentally being. Also being able to, I think a big part of that is enhancing self-awareness on what our own conditioning is, what our beliefs are, what our thoughts are, how we behave. So really getting to know those conditioned parts of us. And that's kind of part of that puzzle too, is being able to kind of shed the skin, if you will, of those conditioned beliefs and tapping into that inner guide that leads us right to ourselves. So in a sense, it's that true self that's there, but kind of, let's say, just buried under all of that cultural conditioning or people's opinions or beliefs we've held as a child and taken on into adulthood. So that mental piece is really understanding how to challenge some of that and understand we're much more than some of these mental aspects, our thinking, our beliefs.
Yeah, well, a billion times yes to that, to getting to know the conditioned parts of us and maybe not getting rid of them, because I noticed that I went through a lot of trauma in my life and then I still feel some of those parts here. They don't seem to go away, but I'm aware that they are here and I'm always listening to them so they don't drive my car. They don't drive my life. I do have a question about that. What are some of the obstacles to healing these conditioned parts of us, Maggie?
I think some of that is just not having the awareness. I think it takes a level of, awareness that these parts exist, kind of what you said. Maybe those are always parts of us, but when we can bring those parts into, the light and into the awareness and start to heal those, like you say, where they're not driving the car, I say where they're not running the show, but we are, they're still a part of us. They guide us and we're aware of them and are able to just recognize where those are from, how they do contribute to our lives.
Yes, some say that this is actually what freedom is. Do you agree?
Yes, I think that's a really, really great point, right? Very freeing, kind of free to be back to that who you are, not guided by all of these other parts that can tend to, especially if we're speaking about trauma, kind of start to run the show. But having that awareness of that and then being able to really accept those parts, then take some action on how to navigate through those parts so that true self comes out instead of these other parts of us that often, I say, can kind of cloud that true self.
And something that I noticed, it has to do when we are being driven by the conditioned parts of us, those unhealed places. I noticed that there's a lot of reactivity. There's no pause, really. It's just kind of, it's very fast the way it responds to the environment and the situations and circumstances. Does it make sense, Maggie, from your perspective as a therapist?
Yes, yes. It's such a good point as if we're talking about a little more of kind of the scientific parts or the physiological parts, the way that our bodies, let's say, were built to instinctually respond, especially if we're talking about that trauma. We kind of get locked into this survival mode and kind of conditioned in that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that from you. I think I have heard from other therapists, I'm sure, here too. But a lot of times I go by my own experiences and how I see all this kind of developing and unfolding in my own life. At this time, what do you feel is the world's greatest need?
Mm. It's a couple things. I definitely think, a connection and a collective connection and acceptance. But I do believe that having that goes back to starting with that relationship with self. There was a saying I heard, and I believe it was by Peter Levine in his book, Waking the Tiger. But the deeper relationship we have with ourselves, the more we can connect with others. And so I think to get that collective connection, let's say, that really connects us all, it kind of starts with those deeper connections that we do make with ourselves. And, being able to just tap into that can then kind of, it's almost a finding of self, and connecting with self can allow us to transcend self, which kind of works then for that greater good. So I think it's kind of a layered answer on that.
So you are a clinical mental health therapist,
Mm-hmm.
EMDR trained therapist, certified trauma informed yoga instructor, mindfulness meditator instructor. So your specialties, you specialize in trauma, PTSD, anxiety, substance abuse and addiction, spirituality, and relationships and codependency. So that caught my attention, as I said, off record. Relationships, codependency. What is codependency?
Mm, that's a good question. And it's a loss of self. It's kind of, I want to say living for others, or almost a hyper focus on everyone else. And so kind of the opposite of what I find to be very powerful and healing, which is that, embracing self, finding self, knowing true self. I think codependency, if you look at the traits, let's say, it has some really beautiful traits in there. But often I think sometimes, it's about this balance. Our really great qualities can sometimes become a deficit, let's say, of not kept in balance. And so I think it's learning how to stay with those beautiful traits that you are, but in a way that serves self, or at least taps into that self first. And then again, being able to have that can then lead to helping others. But the age old analogy we hear about that oxygen mask, right? Having to take care of ourselves first to be able to be filled to serve others.
I interviewed recently somebody about narcissism, and she talked about this disconnect that narcissists, they disconnect from their own feelings. So would you say that narcissists are codependents?
That's a really great question. I think there's a little bit of difference in those two. Although maybe narcissists are a little disconnected and kind of, if we're talking about in a clinical term, lack an inability to introspect, but a little more of the narcissism is very self-serving, in the sense that it's not thinking about others' feelings. It's kind of, an inability to see beyond self, where I see codependency a little more about a hyper focus on everybody else, and kind of that inability to think about that for yourself first.
That's an interesting twist there. Yeah, it's different. So narcissists, they're very self-centered. It's all about them. But codependents, they are different in the sense of giving themselves to others and hyper-focus. That's interesting to hear. What is the cause for that, Maggie, to become a codependent? Because for a while I thought I was. I was always very hyper-focused on other people and very concerned about what they thought of me and trying to please everyone around me, especially my husband. Yeah, what are the causes?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And at least so far, I think a lot about that. I like to always go to what's the root, where does this start? And kind of knowing where it comes from to know how to be able to find solutions for it. So, at least so far in what I've seen, I would say this is very conditioned, starting even very much in childhood, even if we had very great families or not. But it's just ways we kind of learn to adapt and respond in families or even later in relationships that can kind of form these patterns. It's kind of back to that conditioned response, right? And maybe one of these ways that served us well at a time being, but now, like your example, you realize, maybe now that's not quite how I want to respond, or, that's not quite serving me.
I would love to hear a bit more about, I know you have been talking about that, the approach of transpersonal psychology, which is the humanistic approach to therapy, which values wholeness, holistic approaches. I love that. And I don't hear that often, this term, transpersonal psychology. And I'm wondering why. Is that something that's new?
It's not actually. Transpersonal psychology was developed, I believe it was in about the 1960s, but kind of pioneers in transpersonal psychology were Abraham Maslow and Viktor Frankl. So two people I think, are very much talked about within the field of psychology. But for myself, it's interesting. I've done this for a while, and kind of more in my doctoral program, I took this course on transpersonal psychology, and it just very much was a new introduction for me and connected. And I'd say it's definitely about, could also be known as the spiritual psychology. So it's a little more on that spiritual side, right, of our human experience. Yeah, and just something that really speaks to me, and in a time where I think holistic approaches are very common, and we're kind of seeing these ways to treat the whole person instead of just parts. It just seems like such a perfect match, and kind of talks about the things maybe that science can't always define, things that kind of go beyond self or ego, a little more on maybe some of the spiritual experiences in life, even altered states of consciousness. So, kind of that's maybe a little bit of transpersonal psychology in a snapshot.
When you say treating the whole person, not just the parts, and I wonder if you need to start with parts in order to achieve that understanding of wholeness. Because I noticed that every time I think about who am I when I ask that question, it's just I can't find this center point, like this person in me that is the entity as a whole. I find many parts and that compose the wholeness, the person that I think I am. I wonder if that's what happens. You treat parts in order to get to that sense of wholeness. Is that how it works?
Yes, and I think when I'm saying the wholeness or holistic too, it's looking at just there's a lot of parts, but in that sense, meaning the mental part, the physical, the spiritual. So kind of that mind body spirit connection in that sense. Yeah. So, the idea is, you can't wholly be healthy if one of those parts, let's say mind, body, or spirit is not healthy. The other cannot be. And I think often we look at that mind body and starting to really connect those pieces, but, looking at that spirituality piece as well. And that's a very broad term that's going to look different for many different people. So a very open term.
That is true. Yeah. Which is really resembles life. The life is so open. Yeah, I love that because from my experience, tapping into spirituality or my spiritual self has helped incredibly with all the other parts. It's just, it made a huge difference understanding the big picture of life, which is basically unconditional love. Coming from that place, seeing everything as perfection and nothing to fight for or fight about. That it kind of gives me that sense of peace, immediate, instantly. And another piece of your work is mindfulness therapy. You speak of this kind of work as enhancing and helping self-awareness, helping us to become more self-aware. So I would love to hear more about that too. How does it work when you're working with a client on mindfulness therapy?
Yes, mindfulness. And this is another term we hear a lot, let's say, in current day, but, really kind of understanding what mindfulness is. It's just kind of a self-observation, an observation or self-witnessing of ourselves without judgment, just kind of seeing things as they are. So looking at that in the present moment of what are my thoughts and my feelings and some of that conditioning, right? Just recognizing what is that, and being very connected with self, but not judging self, not as this is good or bad. It just is. And, through that mindfulness, the hope is to gain some self-acceptance of these are things and how I think or how I behave, how I feel, and then maybe going with those, or back to what we said, being able to choose intentional ways to respond or interact differently, but through that kind of quieting down and being able just to be in the moment and observe self and really understand your own thoughts and emotions. That's really the gateway to self-awareness, which then hopefully kind of leads to that self-acceptance. And then kind of what we've been talking about, that understanding or uncovering, if you will, of that true self.
I love when you say that, the uncovering of that, of the true self, because it's here now, actually, but it's covered. We are not able to see, most of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the self-love. I know you just mentioned self-acceptance. Would you say is the same as self-love? I do use these words a lot. I mean, the concept of self-love. Is that one concept, self-acceptance and self-love, or they are different from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I actually explore that often, or have been, kind of asked that. And, maybe there's varying perspectives on that. But I do think they're somewhat one and the same. The more that you accept yourself, and maybe through mindfulness, just accepting that, they're ways I think and feel. I don't have to go on that. I was conditioned, so I accept that. But through that, I'm able to love myself instead of judging myself for that. It's just the more I can maybe understand and accept myself as I am and have been conditioned, hopefully the more I just love myself as I am with those conditioned ways, and seeing that just as something that we all have. So I think they're tied together.
What an amazing journey this is, right, Maggie? This experience, which we call life, it's just incredible. I think a lot about life as of a dream. In a dream, we don't know how it started, and we don't know how it will end or how it ended. It just seems like to be this continuous happening, unfolding. So it's interesting that in life, we have a sense that this is happening for a reason, and then sometimes we just create a lot of mental, intellectual ideas of what life is. But it feels to me that's all about, as you said earlier, being present in the moment, being here now, and present to or with what is present. It keeps coming back to me. And then the more I practice that, being in the moment, the more open to life I become, and also joyful. It seems like it's an invitation to joy and happiness. It's amazing because I'm not dwelling in the past, I'm not in the future. So there's more room for creativity, for love. It's just for a lot of good feelings to come and visit. Do you want to elaborate or make any comments on that? That being in the moment is such a magical thing. It really, really is.
It's very true. I really like a lot of what you said there, and just even the self-kindness, self-compassion, and just really learning to embrace the moment and what that really means. Like you say, you're not in these regrets of the past or these worries of the future, but just in the here and now, and these concepts that, I've learned from many spiritual leaders along the way, but, that really it's all we have. And like you said, that kind of resonated about tapping right into that, those feel good feelings, the happiness in the moment. And maybe if it's not, that's okay too, but recognizing every moment's changing. And so just kind of going with what is, I'm thinking of some tools, when the moment's good, kind of really savoring that in the here and now. And when the moment's maybe not as comfortable, understanding, this too shall pass, right? So we kind of just that ebb and flow of each moment and what comes. But yeah, it's very powerful to be able to kind of have that mind state.
It is very, very powerful. And also, it's a challenge for most people, most of us, to stay here present. And it takes practice, right, Maggie? It is a practice, isn't it? It's not something that just happens.
No, I definitely agree. It is not something, it is a practice. And just, the more you practice and it is not necessarily our natural mind state. So definitely take some intentional effort at work and ongoing practice to be able to live that or have that mindset. Mm-hmm.
So we're almost at the end. I do have a few more questions for you, the ending questions, Maggie. Before I ask them, would you like to add anything else or add anything that we left unsaid?
I think, just we touched on quite a few of these topics and concepts. So I really appreciate your time and kind of your guidance on where to go. And just really liking that idea of, that journey to uncover self and ways to do that. And kind of our theme of just really being kind to yourself and compassionate along that way, and kind of going with the ebbs and flows and being able to embrace being in the moment. So kind of a summary of all of that, and really just that intentional effort that stuck out, what you said there at the end, about life in general. I think about that, it does take this intentional effort, but the payoff to that is hopefully some enhanced well-being through those efforts of having that intention.
Yeah, right. It has been very much the case with me, from my experience. So it pays off big time.
I agree. Same for me.
And at some point, it doesn't feel like a practice, really, because then we just flow with it, with the moment. And then it feels really, although we are making an effort, but it doesn't feel like it. It just feels good, really good. So my last questions, I'll ask you two of them. What is another word for life?
Two words popped in my mind when you asked me that question. One was opportunity and one was learning. So maybe an opportunity for learning, maybe a combination of both, But kind of maybe this opportunity of whatever we make it.
Of creating our own realities in a way. Or merging back with the ultimate reality, the absolute reality of that self, right? That true essence. I love that. My last question is, what 3 experiences you wish everyone to have before they lose the body, before they die?
That's a good question. 3 experiences. I think it would be right up there with some of that self-acceptance and love. I think that's so powerful. I would wish everyone could tap into that. Even the self-awareness. I don't think that's, maybe not everyone gets that gift before their time here, ends. And so I think having just that self-awareness with that acceptance and love, and genuinely to be able to uncover that true self, to really embrace, accept, and just honor that true self that is in each one of us, whatever that may mean for you. So actually uncovering, returning to self.
Yeah, I love how you said that throughout the conversation has been the main theme. It just covers everything. Once you have uncovered the true self, then you're truly living. I really believe that, if it is a belief system. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much, Maggie, for your presence here today, for what you do, this beautiful intention to help others, for sharing wisdom and everything else in between. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And before we say goodbye for today, where can we find more information about you, your work, services, and future projects?
Sure, that's great. Thank you. You could actually visit my website, which is www.counselinganywhere.com, and feel free to review a little more on what services I offer, or be able to reach out through that portal.
Wonderful. I'll have the link on your podcast profile too. Thank you again, and we'll talk soon. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye for now, Maggie.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Maggie Lavey and her work, please visit counselinganywhere.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.